Good evening, and welcome to the last episode of On the Campaign Trail. Since November, and over the course of 26 episodes, our program has tried to make sense of the 2022 elections. Well, Election Day was 9 days and what seems like a lifetime ago. We viewed the elections as the most consequential since 1986, that is, of the entire Fifth Republic. With the landslide victory of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., son and namesake of the dictator who brought the Third Republic to a sudden end in 1972 and inaugurated the Fourth Republic in the shadow of military rule in 1981, we must ask ourselves, will another Marcos presidency lead to the end of the Fifth Republic as we know it? I am John Nery, and you are on the campaign trail. Throughout the entire election cycle, the members of the faculty of the Political Science Department of the University of the Philippines-Diliman have made themselves readily available for media appearances, forum guestings, and public briefings. In particular, three professors were most actively engaged in both these public forums and on social media. Like many others, I learned from their many interventions as public intellectuals. I am delighted to say that all three will be joining us tonight. Dr. Aries Arugay is Professor of Political Science in UP Diliman, Editor-in-Chief of the Asian Politics and Policy Journal, and an outstanding young scientist of the National Academy of Science and Technology. Dr. Maria Ela Atienza is also Professor of Political Science at UP Diliman, former Director of the Third World Studies Center, and former President of the Philippine Political Science Association. And joining us later after another media interview, Dr. Jean Encinas Franco, who is Associate Professor of Political Science in UP Diliman, and in a previous life served as Director of the Senate Economic Planning Office. Dr. Aris, Dr. Ella, welcome to the program.
Hello, John. Good evening.
Good evening, John. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for accepting our invitation. And also, Dr. Ella, thank you. I think this is your third time with us.
Yes.
Thank you for making time for our show. Let me start by asking you, I can't help but notice that you are the most active public intellectuals on social media, at least in the social media that I follow, and have been so since before the start of the campaign period. Was this a deliberate decision on the part of the Department of Political Science to actively engage all sorts of audiences? Maybe Dr. Ella?
Yeah, thank you, John. Maybe, to give background to the Department of Political Science, it's part of our mission vision to also not only to teach, to do research in political science. We also want to provide a lot of information to the public, engage different publics, and of course, one of the important political activities is of course election. So it's a deliberate attempt on the part of the Department of Political Science to provide information not only about candidates but actually to provide basic information about the importance of elections, the importance of related concepts like political parties, campaigning, and voting. That's the reason why we have this project, UP sa Halalan, which originally was a project of the University of the Philippines system. Maybe 9 years ago, it started out as a UP system event, but then after several cycles of elections in 2019, they decided to do away with the UP sa Halalan project. So the Department of Political Science at that time, I was the chair. We asked permission if we can use the name, and that stuck with us. We revived it this year. So we partner with different groups, with different media and interest groups to promote public information, better understanding of elections, election issues, and related topics. And at the same time, we encourage different faculty members to participate in this public service. So it's actually our first time to explore much more Twitter for the 2022 elections. Before we have a
Mhm.
we until now we have a website, and then of course we're active in YouTube and at the same time Facebook. But this year, these elections, we have more younger social media savvy colleagues, so they opened up the Twitter spaces for additional discussions.
Thank you, Dr. Aris. Can you give us an idea of what it means to be an engaged public intellectual? It's been, like I said, 19 since the election. But this week, I understand you still have many media interviews and so on. Can you
Right,
walk us through that kind of schedule?
right. Not as much in the past, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, but interview requests have subsided. But John, we're not only engaging local media.
Mhm.
My count, I think I've engaged international media more, or maybe it's almost the same. So
Mhm.
a lot of the requests are from, of course, our local media, but there's also this need to also inform international media. And dito sa international media, hindi tayo nababash masyado. Uh, Maybe it's access, or maybe I don't know what the reason is, but oftentimes I say the same thing with local and foreign media, but the trolls just attack me on local media. But this is my third electoral cycle to be involved
Mhm.
since I came back from my doctoral studies. And I consider this also, for me personally, being engaged in media also helps me make sense, think about the election campaign at different points in time. So in a way, Ma'am Ella is correct in saying this is a service, but personally, this also helps us make sense, and for us to be better teachers, better researchers. Media engagements allow us to make sense of uh, things that are so dynamic, so that after the event, like right now, we'll have a lot of insight and material on how could we really use political science as a discipline in order to analyze what has happened last week.
One of the things that really struck me is that you had a very fast turnaround, no? Fast turnaround time. For instance, there was an issue regarding a certain political philosopher, Machiavelli, and very, very quickly, within a matter of what, 1 or 2 days, you were able to set up a forum. How, how did you do that? What kind of decision making was involved uh, when you put that together?
Maybe I could go first, and
Yes, please.
yeah, because it I'm one of the people who brought it up, simply because I this is political theory or political thought. The introductory course is called Social Science 2. This is the first course I've ever taught 22
Mhm.
years ago, and this is our bread and butter in the department. And uh, we were just so shocked with how this thinker is being used and abused left and right. And we thought that it's unjust. It's also, we thought that there's a compelling reason for us to give a greater discursive analysis with Machiavelli. But to answer your question directly, we have a very active group chat, and the pandemic made that group chat really active. And it's just one message saying, is this a good idea, and then others would chip in. I think uh as someone who has been, and Ma'am Ella can say more about this, overall we're a very collegial department, and we trust one another, and this collegiality helps us to work together. We even pass interview requests with if pag hindi ko na kaya, ipapasa ko sa iba. So there's really, you're correct, there seems to be a team effort, but only because we have total confidence and trust with each other. And that makes the institution really interact dynamic in that sense.
A question for you both, starting with Dr. Ella. Can we talk about patterns in the questions that you receive? Are there questions that international journalists ask more often than local journalists, and vice versa?
Of course, the number one question is how is it possible, of course, before the elections, how is it possible that a son of a dictator is now the front runner in the elections? And of course, afterwards, the next question is after the votes are coming in, what will happen? How did the Filipinos vote? How come many Filipinos vote for Ferdinand Marcos Jr.? And well, perhaps one typical question for them is they want us to explain how Philippine politics actually work, and they're amazed by the fact that our parties are just parties in name. And then, of course, there are some quirks that they cannot really understand. So we have to explain how the elections and politics work in the Philippines.
Dr. Aris, how about you?
Right. What I normally get, and sometimes this is captured on live TV, is that a lot of them are baffled throughout this electoral cycle, from the moment that the candidates have declared their candidacy throughout the campaign. One thing that really boggles them is the fact that the survey frontrunner turned presumptive President Bongbong Marcos Jr. has refused to engage in debates, at particularly the major ones, the Comlex sponsored ones. For them, this is, and this is why you can remember that BBC reporter who mentioned that, and has his post has become viral, the video, and he has also become the target of trolls. A lot of international media, for them, this is really something that, particularly for the Philippines, wherein they think that Filipinos, given their long experience with democracy, with elections, to allow and tolerate such is something that has made journalists really ask those questions to us.
But do you get the sense that they are familiar with the backstory of the Marcoses?
Well, some
You
of
don't need
them
to
are
explain.
familiar. Yeah, some of them are familiar, quite familiar with Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. But there are some media people from other countries that are. They also want us to explain how they were able to come back and, in a way, rehabilitate or reinvent themselves.
Right, John, if I may share, I think
Yes, please.
this might be the first, although I did tweet about it, but one of the most interesting interviews was not actually broadcasted on TV or on the internet, but I actually was asked or consulted. I don't know if I'm the only one. I think the producer also asked others on that particular episode of John Oliver's Last Week Tonight on the
I
Philippine
see.
elections.
Yeah.
And what I can reveal is that they're really on top of their research, and it's not as if they only ask me once; they ask me multiple times. So there is a at first they wanted some background, so I gave them the background, and then they would come back with their own research and they would fact check it with me, or they would verify, is this correct? So I can count maybe 3 or 4 times we've corresponded. So if you can notice, the episode is quite tight.
It
It's,
is.
but only because they've really consulted with political scientists, and they really did their homework, and they make sure that if this is satire, it's satire that is well done. and for me that admiration is to a point wherein maybe we should have one like that in this country. But I don't know,
Mhm.
John, maybe you can host it. But 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 I don't know if that show is going to be tolerated at all given the present
Well,
environment.
I'm no John Oliver, but I did see that terrific episode. I still remember some lines from that show. The Marcoses are the British Museum of Families. Almost everything they own is stolen. I mean, that's just a terrific line.
Right,
Or
right.
the brutal colonization of the U.S. In the Philippines is borderline British.
Because
It's just
it
the
took them
British ghost.
months. Yeah, literally, it's months and months of work. So you
Oh,
can
that's
see that the
fascinating.
quality.
Thank you for giving us a glimpse. But because you brought that up, uh, so okay, so that is one new platform or venue for explaining, for describing what's happening in the Philippines. Um, will you guys be on other new platforms? Like, will you be doing TikToks or maybe
Yeah,
some older ones, like having your own podcast and so on?
we actually have the UP Diliman has a radio program,
Mhm,
DZUP, and
mhm.
we have some programs with them this month, and we're thinking of transforming post elections many of our interviews and activities into podcasts. We haven't discussed TikTok yet, although that could be a possibility, but because we're thinking we need to continue to engage, but we need to develop new platforms and new forms of communicating with a lot of people with different publics.
Right. About TikTok, John, I think some of our interviews might be in TikTok already, and they've been spliced and
Okay.
diced and captured. But unfortunately, they're used for nefarious purposes, for purposes that we did not really want them to be used. Because, for example, my friends back in on my undergrad years would posted that, "Hey, you're in TikTok. Do you know that?" And I said, and it has thousands of views, but it's more like they just took something that I said out of context and use it to prop the candidate that they're trying to promote. So in a way, there is some demand, but I don't know. This is something that if ever I might do it, but in cooperation with my other colleagues. I can't do it alone because
Our
unless
students, yeah,
with our students.
we have four student organizations, and some of them have posted interviews with a number of faculty. Of course, they requested permission on. They posted them on TikTok.
Right. Jean
Yeah, I
Franco
guess
is apparently gone viral on TikTok. I was told in one of
yes,
her
her
interviews last
her
on election night.
testing on
Yes.
ABS. Yes,
Yeah. Right. Right.
that's right. Well, I guess as public intellectuals, you need to be where the public is, and if they happen to be in those new spaces, then
Right.
that's where you'll find yourselves.
I
But
wish there was some TikTok training for us to to
We'll have to
capacity
ask UP teaching office to provide us with the effectiveness of using TikTok
TikTok.
seminars.
yes, and add it and deduct it from your load from your teaching.
I hope you
We're,
guys
we're, we're keeping it light. We started on a light note, but of course, these elections were dead earnest. Uh, but these are the most consequential elections in our memory, at least since 1986.
Yeah.
Um, I wonder, in the context of all this talk about disinformation, would humor, ridicule, be an effective way to counter disinformation?
you know what, John, if I may address this, I know of research that has used humor for resistance.
Mhm.
I can distinctly remember a Thai scholar who wrote her entire dissertation on the role of humor in resistance, resisting the military government in Thailand, and during the post Thaksin era. So I do think it might have to be contextualized given culture, but in the anti-dictatorship struggle,
Mhm.
humor was used very much.
Yes.
So I think culturally and maybe socially, it's something that we can explore. And if you notice during the campaign, a lot of comedians have been tapped
Yeah.
to not only to endorse but to provide content, etc. So it might be a battle, though, a polarized uh, discourse using humor. So it's not
Mm.
just unlike in the dictatorship, wherein it's only one
Mhm.
side making
Mhm.
fun of those in power. But
Mhm.
if it's gonna be used, it's gonna be used by both. So
Yeah.
there might be some repelling that could happen.
In other words, it's a two-sided weapon.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the humor now is in visual forms.
Mm.
Uh, on Twitter, for instance, we follow. I think we all follow the likes of Tarantadong Calbo and cartoonist Zach, right?
Yeah.
I wonder. May I ask for your reflections on this new development? Is this in fact new, or are we just going back to an older form of political engagement, going back to
Yeah.
when we had comics and
Yes. Yeah, because of course, well, in the social sciences, we have this idea of weapons of the weak, where people normally laugh about or talk about lightly their problems, including political problems, and they find different outlets like jokes among themselves, and it can
Mhm.
also be cartoons or drawings or art. It's just that now it's easier to disseminate all these jokes and cartoons because we have more platforms. We can easily post them on Twitter. But even before, we see a lot of groups trying to who feel powerless, but they find the outlets in their cartoons, in their jokes, even in skits or drama. They try to inject some political humor or something relevant about politics, but cannot be easily seen as political. So I think it's just a matter of finding different. We have more platforms now than before,
Mhm.
so they have a tendency of spreading more than before.
But I think Dr. Aris already mentioned this in passing earlier. We don't know if as a society we are ready for that kind of
Yes.
cutting humor. Uh, in other societies, I think they might be used to that, but
Right.
Yeah.
um, I remember I was a long time newspaper editor. Every time we ran a column that was satire, we would get complaints,
Yes.
questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, you know, there is a part of the audience that just doesn't get uh,
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
that kind of political humor.
Yeah.
But maybe because, John, it's
Mhm.
effective. Maybe
Mhm.
because even if you use satire, you use humor, it's something that people um, could relate to. But you're correct. I think the atmosphere now, the political atmosphere, is less tolerant about these types of engagement, these types of exposition of political views, of political opinions. And therefore, we know that there's a lot of, there's this barrage, and Rappler knows this for sure, of cyber libel cases, of
Mhm.
defamation cases. So it's, we know that I think a sign of a vibrant democracy is this tolerance towards it, that humor must be seen with an ability to really expose and maybe nudge politicians to do better. But I don't see that in the present
Mm. Yeah.
circumstances.
Can I ask you? back to the very first question that I raised, and then Dr. Ella said, uh, some international journalists ask you, why is it happening like this, right? Uh, can I ask both of you, what are the three or four factors that explain Marcos's victory? Dr. Ella, first.
Well, in terms of factors, of course, they have a lot of resources that they have used in uh, investing in rebranding the family name. So it took them decades to actually reinvent or reframe the family name and the legacy of the father. At the same time, also they have not cut their links with the traditional politicians and political families in the Philippines. And then, of course, this network of disinformation that they have used very creatively to try to tap into the disappointments of a lot of people. And probably because since 1986, while we have tried through the 1987 Constitution and the other processes and institutions that we have set up to try to remove the authoritarian legacies of Marcos, until now, we have not really achieved the promises of 1986 to have a more inclusive, more equal society. We still have a lot of elites and this has led to a lot of disappointment on the part of people who continue to be left out, and that in a way made them vulnerable to exploitation and influence.
If I could rephrase your answer, I can borrow someone's argument that it's really the three M's: no? Money, machinery, and misinformation. Although I
Yeah.
don't like to use that
Mhm.
word. And then we
Yeah.
can add also, as far as resentment,
Mm.
resentment is concerned. Maybe another M, like a sense of misery. Uh,
Yes.
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
the four M's. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Aris, what about you? What
Right, right. When you mentioned four, I actually listed it down because yesterday I gave a talk to of all places, a university in China, and about this election. That was my
Mhm.
first public presentation on what I thought happened in the election. So I gave four, but at present I'm still trying to rank them in terms of importance. So
Right.
what Dr. Ella said about the Marcos machinery, I think captures more the political and institutional side or explanation, because I really think, and the hypothetical is quite convincing, that if Sara Duterte also ran for the presidency, then you would have a different arena of
Mhm.
so for me, that falls within the mere fact that they have cartelized, these dynasties have cartelized. And I can distinctly remember when I first mentioned this in a media interview, um, I was not pilloried, but I was heavily criticized by the other analysts, saying that this will not happen. But my knowledge of how political elites have cartelized in other countries have informed
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
that hunch. The second is what Dr. Ella also mentioned, the where the authoritarian fantasy, authoritarian nostalgia comes in. Because let's remember, Marcos is not the first in the world that has run using this. Park Geun-hye in South Korea won also.
Mhm.
Keiko Fujimori almost won in Peru. But
Mhm.
this means that there is this raw material of authoritarian nostalgia that Marcos Jr. was able to successfully tap. The two others would be economic. You mentioned misery,
Mhm.
because I do think the pandemic has really made Filipinos desperate, and they have not become more adventurous, unlike in 2016, about their voting choices. So, what more conservative choice could you get than the political brand of Marcos, whose dynasty has ruled the Philippines for 2 decades? And then the last would be disinformation. So I'm not yet sure how to rank, but those are the four front
Mhm.
runner factors or explanations, though I still need to do a little bit of thinking. I'm not one of those, John, that already say I figured it out. It's been only a couple of weeks, and I'm humble enough to say that I have not figured it out, and I'm trying to think about this, and I'm losing sleep over this for sure.
Still working through the trauma of last week's elections. Can I just make a quick follow-up, Dr. Aries? Your third point about pandemic response. I mean, I would think, or I would have thought that the uh, pandemic response of the government would be a negative or would be a minus factor. But it turns out to have, in your reading, possibly it turned into a positive. It restricted them, their choice of their political menu, so to speak,
Right.
became much restricted.
Right. Dr. Ella can say more about this because she studied COVID responses of the government. But the quick follow up is this is where I think luck plays, because there's some role of luck with the Marcos campaign, because they're able to even package themselves not totally as a continuity candidate. The babangon muli discourse and the fact that they're able to somehow distance themselves from the administration and therefore its pandemic response allow them to capture this longing for a better response. So when people say, well, Marcos Jr. is not a Duterte, actually that worked in Marcos Jr.'s favor because he's able to present himself that uh, the babangon muli is, I think, can refer to a lot of things. It can be used broadly because the narrative is that 36 years post Marcos will rise from this, but it can also mean the foibles of the Marcos of the Duterte administration, that I can do better, and but I but it will not be totally different. It will not be totally it will not be adventurous because I'm running with Sara Duterte. So there's still that Duterte brand, but at the same time, it's gonna be enhanced and improved. So I think but that's luck, because if President Duterte endorsed Marcos Jr. from the get-go, then he can't make that.
Ah,
He can't present himself as totally a change candidate. He will have to defend the administration's record throughout the campaign. But he was not endorsed. So maybe we don't know. Maybe that was really the strategy all along. We're still trying to figure it out.
So if I were to rephrase your answer, it would be like ABCD, from political alignment, through COVID response to disinformation. Can I ask you both? I was a little concerned when I came across this tweet early today. Some well-meaning person referred to, if I may quote it, something like the focus on disinformation to explain the election outcome is the liberal consensus. Is it in fact the liberal consensus? And is it in fact a liberal perspective to focus on disinformation as one of the factors?
well, of course, we need one of the important aspects of being a good participant or a good citizen is you need to possess information. But I don't think it's purely liberal wanting people to get the correct information. In fact, information can getting the correct information can be the stepping stone for organizing and actually trying to appreciate and understand the fact that there's still inequality in Philippine society. So it's not just a liberal explanation. It's one of the reasons why Bongbong Marcos won. But at the same time, also, disinformation is a problem not only for liberal societies. It's not just an issue for people with liberal tendencies. It's an issue even for people with more progressive ideas, because that's one of the first things that you need to correct. You need to give people the correct information so that they can organize and think of ways to improve their situation. I read
Thank
that tweet as well.
I was not able to read that
I
tweet, but
saw that.
my first response, my quick response is this really is more indicative of how perniciously polarized we are. That we even treat a grave existential problem to our democracy from such ideological lens, because we know, John, that the label liberal in our context right now is very politically charged. It only refers to a portion of society rather than an ideology that is more aspirational, more towards the common good. I think that that tweet really is trying to foment, not really foment, but maybe unintentionally is being, it could contribute further, instead of depolarizing, instead of rallying behind this existential problem of disinformation. The tweet for me seems to be like, oh, this is only a problem for a certain sector of society, but not with the majority, and not with the entire republic.
I still need to wrap my head around it. But at this point, I would like to welcome Dr. Jean Encinas Franco to the discussion. She came from another media interview previously scheduled at the same time. I am delighted to welcome her to the discussion.
Good evening, John. Good evening to
Hi,
my
Hi,
colleagues, Prof. Ella and Prof. Aries.
hi, Dr. Jean. Thank you for joining us. Um, I wanted to, at this point, ask your help. Uh, we've been in on this show and in other shows. We've asked you to analyze, the political reality. At this point, I'd like you to help me analyze the analysts, or at least their analysis. If you could, you just respond, help us come to terms with some of the points. So let me start with a um, an argument raised by Professor Malutikia, that Marcos would not have won. To summarize her argument, Marcos would not have won without Sara Duterte.
Hmm. Oh, wow. That's very controversial. When did she say that? After the elections?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, maybe they're banking on the fact that prior to Sarah joining the tandem, I think BBM was not yet hitting the 50% mark, if I'm not mistaken, during the surveys.
Mhm.
And she's probably thinking of the Mindanao votes, no, which carried Marcos Jr., because we all know that Mindanao is a weakness for Jr. I think they help each other. I think that's the fairest way to assess it.
If you take a look at the numbers from Mindanao, it's very difficult to explain the complete dominance of Marcos, you know,
Mhm.
in martial law damaged Mindanao without factoring in Sara Duterte.
Hmm.
Marcos has 8 million votes from Mindanao. I think, if I'm not mistaken, President Duterte himself only got something like 6 million from the six regions in Mindanao in 2016. Um, and Lenny Robredo got 1.6 million, 20% of what Marcos got. Um, whoever brokered their alliance, I think, is partly responsible for the victory.
Yeah.
Um, another thing I'd like to run by you. There is this see, Manolo Quezon wrote this really long piece for Asian Sentinel.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Yeah.
he's saying that what happened is the culmination of a 30-year uh, program uh, at restoring the Marcos legacy. Can I ask any of you to weigh in on that?
Yeah,
Well, go ahead, Jean. Go ahead.
yeah. I think Manolo Quezon is right that it's a 30-year program, because if you think about it, I think it was Aris who first said this in an interview. Now I'm citing Aris. Ano, but, they never left.
Yeah.
Because they and I 1992 Imelda already run.
Yeah.
Uh, Imelda already had the audacity to run for president in
President. Yeah.
1992, and then yeah, and then when he she lost, they moved to their bailiwicks, no?
Mm. Mm.
So, and then, Borgie Manotoc was accepted by the fashion and arts or industry, di ba? He
Mm-mm.
was a model or something like that. So,
Mhm.
um, such acceptance would never have been possible in other contexts, for
Yeah.
instance, in Japan or in South Korea. So, I think Manolo Quezon is right in that regard, that they've really prepared for this return. They're so motivated that they're willing to do it at all costs, di ba?
Mm.
But is it? Let me just seize on one of the things that you said. Is it in fact true that they never left, or is that like a way of just phrasing the reality? Or
Yeah, yeah. What I mean is that there was never even a chance in which people will, forget about them.
mm-hmm,
Right.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there were also talks that maybe they should have been banned from
Yeah.
running or
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the high society
Yeah.
accepted them readily when they came back.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember when Imelda Marcos turned 80. She was on the front page of more than one newspaper. I think one of the things that the Marcoses did very successfully, perhaps even ahead of the Kardashians, was use celebrification to their
Yeah.
advantage.
Yeah.
Dr. Jean talked about Borgie Manotoc, who was a model decades ago, uh,
Yes.
as a way, and well, in fact appeared on TV
Yeah.
sitcoms,
Yeah.
as a way to make it to make them seem familiar or normal. Um, Dr. Aris, what do we think of the idea that Marcos won because of quote unquote decades of dysfunctional democracy?
Okay. Uh this and it seems like when this narrative and this explanation is only the blame is being pointed to only a clique or a faction of the political class in the country. Let's remember the 36 years since 1986. A lot of those years might be we're talking about different periods wherein different factions of the political class occupied power. So when people say that, oh, on social media, and this is disinformation for sure, that this is the liberals, the yellows, and the Aquinos. Let's remember that Gloria Arroyo was president for 9 years. Erap Estrada was president for 3 years. So 12 of those 3 decades was because of these are members of the coalition that was built by Marcos Jr., Duterte, etc. So there's this convenient sweeping of particular peculiar details. But in this information, it's easier to do this hasty generalizations without
Mhm.
really pointing out accurately that democratic erosion or what they call now dysfunctional democracy is not the monopoly of one politician. And political scientists have said that this is a gradual process that culminates into collapse. But even the most democratic of actors might even unintentionally contribute to democratic erosion. So this false dichotomy that it's only the fault of one is, I think, was part of the electoral strategy to be able to say that democracy is not working and to prop the strong man, to prop some form of populist authoritarian alternative uh, that is the brand of Marcos and Duterte.
Anyone else want to give it a try?
Yeah, I think when we look back since 1986, and there are a lot of studies already pointing out some of the things that different administrations have failed to do. So it's not just, as Aris mentioned, it's not just the fault of the Aquinos or a particular faction of the political elite. Succeeding administrations have also failed to consolidate democracy. There were laws that were not implemented properly. Some of the institutions or some of the laws that are actually needed to strengthen institutions and democratic processes have not really been pushed up to now, and that's why we have problems with access to information and transparency in government. We have not also protected accountability institutions, and at the same time also the members of the court and the justice system. So these things accumulate, and in the process, they contributed to some people feeling dissatisfied, and at the same time looking for alternatives.
John, just quickly,
Yes, please.
now I remember, and this is quite ironic because I think that narrative becomes so powerful because Filipinos forget the shifting alliances of politicians. So it's easy to say that there are two opposite camps right now, but
Mhm.
let's remember the Duterte dynasty supported the
Yeah,
Aquinos,
yeah,
and so it's like they're changing colors every presidential administration. So to pinpoint the blame just to one dynasty, I think is convenient, but also is historically inaccurate because of our weak, volatile, and you can even say decrepit party system. These alliances, these loyalties shift every administration. So, in fact, if there is blame, it should be to the entire political class because they have become predatory. They have not built institutions. So and the irony is, why are the Marcoses and the Dutertes be the ones to save a dysfunctional democracy when their record doesn't speak of any? And I've said this, and I'm sure I'm going to be bashed tomorrow, that they have not shown any democratic credentials. So that's the irony of it all for me.
Um, Based on your understanding of what happens in other polities, what do you think will happen in the next, say, 6 months uh, under this second Marcos administration? Can I ask each one of you, maybe starting with Dr. Ella?
Uh, well, I anticipate a lot of power play among uh, the traditional family politicians and the political families that are part of the successful tandem, part of the group that brought the tandem of Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte together. So and to power, so there will be a lot of power play and negotiations, but at the same time also I see a lot of uncertainty as regards, for instance, what will be the policies that they will pursue. Until now it's unclear what are their economic, what are the components of their economic agenda, how will they deal with what is this uh, concept of unity that they keep repeating throughout the campaign, and that appeared to be working. So they really need to sit down and explain to the people how they plan to establish this unity. Of course, it's important for the other sectors to continue to watch and to also monitor what is happening, and because there could be a lot of threats, and there are already indications that they will not readily talk to media, they will not answer difficult questions. At the same time, they can be very secretive about their activities and actions. So we also have to hold them to account, but at the same time, making sure that what remains in terms of our democratic institutions and practices will be protected.
Thank you. Dr. Aries?
Okay, it's good that Jean would be last because she might say something positive. Uh, I for and you know I'm not invoking my dissertation here, but I studied four democracies in my dissertation: Venezuela, Bolivia, Thailand, and the Philippines. And before 2022, three of those four, the democracies already collapsed. Thailand is under a military government. Venezuela continues to be in some de facto civil war. Bolivia ousted Morales, a democratically elected president, is also in a very stable position. The glimmer of hope before 2022 was my country, the Philippines. I cannot say that it is. And I hope I'm wrong, because if I'm wrong, then it's just me. But if I'm right that polarization will further be perniciously felt, and we're all I can say is that as a republic, we better brace ourselves.
Yeah.
Let's hear the silver lining from Dr. G. If there are any?
I'm thinking about why it's taking them a long time to put together a new set of economic managers, because I think it is important that we have continuity, especially with NEDA, because if you recall, we have an Ambition 2040. It's very important because that plan transcends different administrations. So it's very important that it is continued and sustainably implemented. No, given that it has to be recalibrated. No, given the pandemic, no, and how we will cover it. Yeah,
Dr. Ella?
Political uh,
Once you think that I can go first.
Maybe at this point it's important to talk about uh, Aristotle and discuss, of course, the pitfalls of majority rule, and at the same time the importance of getting the majority informed, because that's the only thing that can actually improve the democracy can be bad because if people are misinformed, majority of the people are misinformed, but democracy can be the police or the positive version of democracy if people are informed.
The philosopher who taught us that virtue is an act of habit. Is a
Yeah.
matter of habit, right? Which explains the lack of virtue in some of our politicians. Dr. Aries?
Right. Uh, Before elections, I would think Plato's Republic, because it really shows you that those who are those who have had the training for ruling should, and the experience and the competence should be like. But after elections, John, I have two. John Stuart Mill, his
Okay.
essay on liberty,
Mm-hmm.
emphasizes, and I think he's also inspired by what Doc Ella mentioned, Aristotle's virtue, the fact that the majority is has tyrannical abilities, and a liberal and free society must ensure that the majority will not be seen as a source of dogma or dead truth, because the truth is not monopolized by the majority. But the second one, and this is where some positive optimism, or some optimism we can get, is Alexis de Tocqueville in his work Democracy in America, wherein he mentioned that democracy survived in America not because of the state, but because of civil society and NGOs.
Thank you. And Dr. Jean?
I think for me it's Simone de Beauvoir. Mainly, well, she did not consider herself as a philosopher, but many regard her as as a philosopher, mainly because of his
Mhm.
contributions to feminist theory.
Mhm.
And I guess one way to look at the revival of the strongman appeal is that Filipinos, and I think most countries in the world, still believe that leadership is a male domain, and that the way we look at leadership is always based on masculine traits. And that's why we think that all men who run for office are qualified, whereas women need to prove themselves much, much harder, diba? When they enter politics.
That's true. I think women who are ambitious in politics are labeled ambitious, but
Yeah.
men who are similarly ambitious are, just hard driving and so on. Dr. Arugay, Dr. Atienza, Dr. Franco, thank you for your time and for your work illuminating the public square. Thank you.
Thanks for
And thank
having
you
us.
for the invitation, John.
Thank you for the compre exam.
That's it for us. Thank you for joining us on the campaign trail. The next step for engaged citizens is to take a more active part in rebuilding our democracy. See you in the public square. This is John Nery. Thank you and good night.